Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be working on a project that is not a sewing project. It is a Christmas ornament that is these adorable little fabric stars. And these stars do not involve a sewing machine or sewing at all. We're going to be using an iron and some cutting and some folding, and that's about it. They're very, very easy to make. They're user-friendly. They are something that you could get your kids to make. They are, if you are a beginner crafter, this is a great project to start with. And I also think that you can make so many different ones. You could fill your whole Christmas tree, which is what I plan to do with them. So let's get started. So here's what we're going to need to make these adorable little stars. We're going to need 4 strips of fabric, and these are already ironed and prepped and ready to go, but they're going to start out looking like this. They're just going to be 4 inches by 14 inches. And you're going to have 4 of them. You can have, like I have, 2 different coordinating fabrics. You could have 4 different coordinating fabrics. You could have them all be exactly the same fabric. This star that I showed you earlier is actually made with 2 coordinating fabrics. You're also going to need a little bit of fabric glue. However, it's not absolutely necessary that you have it. You'll need something to cut with. I think having a pair of tweezers will come in handy because there's parts where we're kind of pulling out fabric between the layers. If you want to put your label, you'll of course need one of those. You'll need a little bit of embroidery thread and an embroidery needle to put the string on that we're going to hang it by. You'll also need your iron, and you may want to get some starch, because if we apply some starch to these fabrics, it makes them much easier to work with. It gives them a little more bulk to them. So that's what you're going to need. It's relatively few items. Let's get started. So here's what we're going to do to prepare the fabric that we're going to need for those 4 strips. We're going to do the same thing to each one of them. I'm going to start by putting some starch on there. Just again, it gives it a little more bulk to the fabric, makes it a little bit easier to work with. All you do is spray it on there. It really doesn't matter what kind of starch you might want to use. And we're going to iron it until that starch is pretty much dried off. Get it nice and straight, get out the wrinkles that you might have in your fabric. And then we're going to take the fabric and we're just going to fold it in half with the not pretty sides together. Just fold it in half and press that down. And then after we've done that, we're going to take each side of it and we're going to press it in almost to that center line there. Just press that down. The starch makes it so much easier to get crisp lines really quickly. And then we're just going to take the other side and also press it down toward the center, not quite on that center line. And then finally, we're going to take the fabric and we're going to fold it over on itself and give it one final press. And then after we've done that with all 4 of our strips of fabric, we're going to fold it in half, but not completely in half. We're going to leave a little bit of space. I'm going to trim off those strings, but we're going to leave a little bit of space here at the end that will not be completely folded in half. So when we have finished all of our strips, they're going to look something like this. They're going to have a little bit of tail down here at this end. Once we have all 4 of our pieces ironed and folded, we are ready to start to begin the folding process. So what we want to do in the case of a star that has 2 different fabrics, we're going to lay them apart from each other, across from each other like this. And then we'll take the other 2 fabrics that are like each other and lay them across from each other. And then we want to make sure that we have the open end at the same place on each one of the pieces of fabric. So we have open end here that will go into this closed end. See how it's closed, it's folded over. And then down here we have the open end that's going to be folded into this closed end. And then over here, we're going to have the closed end that's going to go into this part and the open end that'll go into this part. And so you're going to lay it out with the closed end on the same place in each one of them. Here it is, and then here it is again, and then here it is again, and then here it is again. And so now we're ready to actually start making some folds. The first thing we're going to do is take this top one and we're going to put it inside of this closed end. And then we'll come down here to the bottom and we will put the open end into the closed end. And then over here on this side, we will take this open end this open end that we have here, and it will go inside of that closed end. And then the final one up here will be the closed end that actually goes into the folded one. So we've basically made sure that all of our open ends are going to be put into one of the closed corners. Once we've done this, we're just going to push them together so that they're all in the middle. And you kind of want this to be pretty tight because we're going to begin to do what I would call a weaving process. And we need for that weaving process to start with the fabrics all being pretty tightly laid together. So I'm just going to keep pulling on each one until they look like they have equal tails coming off of them. And I'm going to make sure that it's tight, but it's not, none of the fabric is overlapping. So that's about the way we want it to look. And remember, we've got our 4 in the middle that we've just laid that way, and then we've got 4 tails with the short end on top. But now that once we get to this step, we're going to turn it over. All right, so now we've got our one little box here in the middle with 4 little squares in it, and we have turned it over so that the long ends are on top. The shorter end is down there underneath. And now we're going to do one more weaving. We're going to take this, doesn't matter where you start, we're going to start with this one, and we're going to fold it down. And then we're going to take this one, and we're going to fold it over. And then we're going to take this one, and we're going to fold it over. And then we'll take this final one, and we're actually going to put it under this one to tie it all together. So it's actually going to go under this last one. And then we just kind of do the same thing. We pull it, make sure we've got it even. And what you should have now, once you've done this second weaving is what I would call it, now we're ready to start making the little tips, the little points of our stars. And what we have over here on the outside are all of the short ends. Some of them are longer than others, but we'll see what we do about that in just a second. So now we're ready to start making our little peaks on our stars. And we're going to follow one rule as we go through this process. And that rule is that you have to make sure that when it's time to tuck, that there's something to tuck into. For example, we can't tuck in here. There is nowhere to tuck. But if we end up right here, there is something to tuck into. And I think that'll make more sense to you as we go through and start making these little peaks. We're going to start with this guy right here. Now, we're going to start by folding it over like this. Now, we already know, or we're going to know at this point, that we can't tuck in. There's nothing to tuck into there. So we need to turn it over. Now there will be a place for us to tuck it in. The next thing that we need to do, once we've turned it over, is we're going to fold this part of it down like this, so that we make what I call the tent, the perfect tent. And the tent needs to have a really clear tip on it up here, because that's what's going to make the point of our star. Then we're going to take our tent and we're going to fold it over on itself like this. And then we need to take this part and put it under this little flap. Now, when you get it under there, you're going to see that this one is a little bit too long. So I'm just going to pull it down a little bit farther, and I'm going to cut it off. Be careful that you don't cut any other part of the star. You only cut off that little tail. And then I'm just going to tighten the other straps all around it and tuck it in there a little bit. And now we have our very first point. Now, to make the second point, we can just go to this very next one. And the same thing's going to apply. I'm actually going to turn it around like this. We're going to take it and we're going to turn it to the side. And we're going to actually discover that we can't tuck it in there. There's nothing to tuck it in. So we're going to flip it over, because now there is something to tuck it into right here. And then we're going to make our little tent with a very sharp point on the tip. And that's this part right here. And then we're going to fold the tent in on itself, like so. And then we're going to tuck it in to this strap. Now, this is where you might want to use a tool to pull it through there. I think once you've done a few of these, it gets a little bit easier. They're not terribly difficult to pull through. And then we're just going to make sure that we tightened it all back up, because we don't want to lose that tightness as we go through and make our tips. All right, so now I'm just going to work my way around. But as I make my way around, I do like to turn it again so that I have the part I'm working on at the top. Again, I think we could just turn it over and start over here. So if we are going to do our next one, we can turn it in. We can tuck it in right there. So we're going to fold it over like this. And then we're going to make our little tent. It's going to look like this with a very sharp top point. And then we're going to fold it over on itself like this. And then we're going to tuck our little tail in. Now this tail might be too long, and we might need to trim this one like we did the other one. So I'm going to tuck it in there. Yes, I'm going to pull it down a little bit. So I'm pulling it down a little bit lower so the tip kind of dips down into the star. And I'm just going to cut off the end here, just about that much of it. And then I'm going to pull that star back up, hopefully enough that the tail disappears. And then I'm going to tighten it again. Got a little bit of that tail showing, so I'm going to pull it back out again, just like that. I'm just going to cut off a little tiny bit more. Careful not to cut off any of the part of the star that I don't want to cut. All right, and then I'm going to just put my tip back up where it belongs, up here. Gonna pull it up and pull these tight again so that I'm keeping it folded, keeping it pretty tightly weaved, and I'm keeping it neat where there's no tail sticking out. So you're just going to continue that process all the way around, remembering that you need to always be on the side where you can tuck it in. For example, when we get to this one, we can turn it, but we'll have to turn it over to get to the part where we can tuck it in, if that makes sense. So you're going to go ahead and finish all of the different peaks until you get to the very last one, and then we'll come back. So here we are. We finished doing the weaving part, and our star is really complete. There are only a few steps left for us to do. One thing that you might want to do is take it back to your iron and just give it one more really good press. I'm actually going to do that because I'm going to add my label to the side that I think will be the back. Both sides are really pretty. This side with the beautiful reds on it, and then this side again. Ooh, I'm not sure which side would be the not pretty side. And you may not want to add a label to it. I'm giving mine as gifts and to family, so I'd like for them to remember who made it. So the last thing that we're going to do after we have done that, if you want to add a label to yours, is we're just going to add a way to tie it and to hang it from. And I would just use embroidery string. You can just string it right through here and then tie it up in a knot, which is the way that I did this one. And then it's ready for you to hang on the tree. And that is really all there is to your folding your star. If you want to, you could go back and put a little fabric glue in here to make sure that it stays together well. But this is a simple project that easily could be completed by a beginner, and it might be a craft that your kids would enjoy as well. So I hope you enjoyed our tutorial today, our non-sewing tutorial. I'll see you again soon.